What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this one, I'm going to be building the ultimate gaming PC build with the Ryzen 7800 X3D, RTX 4090, and even this, a top-of-the-range Gen 5 PCIe NVMe drive. Let's do this. Today's GeekaWhat video will be split into two key sections. First, I'll be running you guys through all the parts that make this build possible and showing you how to actually assemble it, before second, looking at the performance in detail to see how this killer combination of parts really stacks up. I'm going to start things off by talking about the heart of any build, the CPU. This is the monstrous AMD Ryzen 7 7800 X3D. With 8 cores and 16 threads, this thing is going to be absolutely top-notch for gaming in all the latest titles, and a boost clock speed of up to 5 GHz is a pretty nippy little chip. But it's not the cores or the clock speeds that really make this thing stand out. Oh no, it's the 3D stacked cache. Now, AMD basically took the existing cache that you'll see on a mainstream desktop chip, specifically the 7800 non-X3D, and went, you know what, let's put a bit more of it in there, let's stack it, make it 3D, and basically alleviated one of the biggest bottlenecks in modern CPUs. Now, there are higher core count variants available. If you're using this build, for example, for video editing or streaming, definitely go for the 7900 or 7950 X3D. But if gaming's all you're after, 8 cores is still plenty. I'll be installing this onto the motherboard for this build, which is the ASUS ROG Strix X670E gaming Wi-Fi. Now, you might be wondering why I've gone for a mini ITX motherboard. That's all linked to the case choice later on in this build, as I wanted something that was a little bit more compact and proved that you don't have to have a humongous system in order to build a PC that packs a punch. This ASUS ROG Strix board is also absolutely laden with features. With 2.5 gig Ethernet on the rear panel, loads of connectivity on the board itself, and all of your high-speed USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C ports. Ooh! It really does have everything that we need, and of course, crucially, supports our X3D processors. Installing the CPU is really easy. This video isn't intended to be a step-by-step detailed build tutorial, but it should give you a good idea of how to put together a system like this one. Ryzen CPUs are like Intel now. The pins are actually on the socket on the motherboard rather than being on the processor, so that makes things a little bit easier. I'm going to come back to the CPU cooler a little bit later, but first install the memory. Now, tying in with a little bit of a Thermaltake theme in this build, I've picked up their ToughRAM D5 RGB. This is a 32GB DDR5 kit with plenty of speed under the hood. Now, you'll see here that if we remove this included block of sort of connections, we'll be using this later to wire up USB 2 and front panel. 2 RAM DIMMs become available, and these are where the memory is going to install. 1 RAM DIMM first of all on the left-hand side, and then a second one. You'll notice the Thermaltake logo design faces outwards away from the CPU. Once it's lined up, apply a bit of pressure and it will click nice and easily into place. The next thing to do is go ahead and pop the Gen 5 SSD in. If you want to know honestly whether this is overkill for even a 4090 build, the answer is yes, very much so. But I'm going to use it because I want to put something together that really is super high end. And this, boy, this is high end. I've got to give a massive shout out. These are quite expensive at the moment. To box.co.uk, who very kindly provided this over. I'll link our review down below and all of our other content associated. I'm not really sure how yet it's going to install, given this included sort of array. We've got to keep the included heat spreader on, as the drive is simply too hot with the individual motherboard heat spreaders. Gen 5 drives are so quick that you need beefy cooling. Super, super important. First things first, I am going to remove the included heat spreader. So a couple of screws and that'll pop off. Then the Gen 5 drive should slot into the top. I'm hoping that this is actually one of the Gen 5 slots. I think that ASUS would have done it that way. I'm not entirely sure. Are there any clues on the slot itself? No. I'm going to check that, but for now, let's presume that's all right. Slide that in, get that fastened down. It is very chunky, it is very large, but it looks good, and it's going to provide us with awesome performance. Certainly a nice substitute for the included ASUS heatsink, if not quite as sleek. As far as the case goes for this build, I've picked up a familiar but equally new chassis in the form of the Thermaltake Tower 200. We reviewed the Tower 100 when that first came out, and you won't be surprised to find out that this is quite a similar chassis, but bigger. In many respects, that's not necessarily a bad thing either. You still keep the fundamental design principles with mesh on the left, right, back, and on the bottom at the front just here, as well as the tempered glass, without getting a huge amount bigger than the Tower 100 was originally, while in exchange providing more room for motherboards, power supplies, graphics cards, and most importantly, CPU liquid cooling. Previously, this case only supported a 140mm radiator. Now I believe we can get a 280 in here, which is going to be a lot better for CPU cooling. Aha! All of the side panels are fully toolless. Thermaltake. I like that. And of course you can see here where the 280mm radiator is going to be installed a little bit later. I think a couple of screws, let's remove that now, are all it actually needs in order to get this thing out and makes installing the radiator, hopefully, that little bit easier. Technically speaking, I think this case can support up to an M80X motherboard. You have only got 3 PCI lanes that are easily accessible, and all of the cable routing is better for a mini ITX design. So I'm going to stick with that today and slide the motherboard in a little something like so. Of course, it has to be said though, if you want the extra expandability provided by a larger M80X board, it's nice to see that that is an option. A screw in each corner is going to fasten that down. I've also just noticed this cool little vertical GPU support bracket. That looks very interesting, but shouldn't get too distracted. We'll deal with this properly a little bit later. Specifically, the CPU cooler is next on the list. Now, this is actually a really cool cooler in many ways, hopefully in terms of performance, but also in terms of the design. Now, let me show you what I mean. So these fans, rather than the blade lighting up or there be a ring around the fan, the whole kind of shell or chassis of the fan is what lights up, and it even comes through all these little square holes throughout the case. It really is something quite interesting, and for a build like this where there's lots of glass and we can really easily see into the system, I like that. Cooler wise, this is 280mm, so it is going to be fine for the 7800 X3D. It should allow us to do a little bit of overclocking, but primarily keep those temperatures low, which is the most important bit for me, and you got a screen on it, which is always nice. All the mounting hardware needed is in here. I'm going to pop the AMD mounting hardware onto the block for now, and then add the radiator fans and the radiator, I think ideally in a push-pull config, so we've got fans bringing air into the chassis and then fans bringing air through the radiator, giving us maximum airflow, or at least that's the idea. I have picked up some more 14-inch Thermaltake Tough fans to make this possible. I'll link these alongside everything today down below. While I'm here, I'm also going to swap out the top fan for a 140mm Tough fan to make everything match, and we should be good to go.
A few moments later.
That isn't going to fit, is it? That isn't going to fit. Right, so I think I've tried to be a little bit overly ambitious. I've put the radiator in push-pull. It doesn't work. The water block gets in the way. I mean, that would make logical sense. So unfortunately, I've got to take off one set of the fans, which is okay. Cooling-wise, it's still going to be totally fine. And I can repurpose the fans elsewhere in the case to make up the airflow deficit. A bit disappointing, but that's how things roll sometimes in a smaller mini ITX build. I make these mistakes, hopefully, so you guys don't have to. It's really starting to come together, and I think now makes sense to actually pop the GPU in. This is one of the bits I've been most excited for. Now, this case does have a few cool little features, including, of course, the ability to mount the GPU here. You get really great GPU mounting support because of the cutout in the bottom plate, and the inclusion of a GPU support bracket. I'm not quite sure how that works, but we'll figure that out, just to kind of really hold and bolster the card in, especially when the graphics card in question is this, the ASUS TUF RTX 4090. Now, if I open this thing up, you'll be able to see what I mean when I say that it is quite the unit. Now, I know Nvidia haven't always smashed 40 series out the park, but the 4090 is undeniably the most powerful gaming GPU on the market, and putting it in a smaller form factor build like this one, while still not compromising on performance and thermals, was really important to me. I'm going to take my screwdriver and loosen this GPU support bracket first of all. I'm also going to remove the, is it 3 included PCI lanes? No, the GPU only has 2 lanes on the back. Although it's a 3-slot card, you only actually need to mount it on 2 of the PCI covers. Then I'm going to pop the clip down and slide the card in. Now, this is a little bit of a challenge. My math says that it should fit, but as with all things in life, there's no guarantee. The GPU bracket's like in the way a bit. Okay, so we seem to have a bit of a problem. That GPU support bracket I've been harping on about does not seem to want to be playing ball, and I think we're going to have to remove it. The problem is that this thing seems to stick up too high and actually blocks the end of the GPU from pushing down fully into the slot. Let's try that again, shall we? So pop the GPU in, a little bit of a easing in required, then click into place. Aha, looking good. Couple of screws. That's going to be nice and secure and looks, I think, pretty good. All that's left to do then is pop the power supply in. I've picked up this 1200 watt Thermaltake unit, maybe a little bit overkill. I think 4090, 1000 watts is a good idea. Whether you need to add the extra, can't get into it. The extra 200 is sort of to be determined, I suppose. ATX3, PCI Gen 5, all that goodness has everything we need for this build, and of course is going to look the part. Now this video isn't going to be a full cables and wiring guide. We have done one of those on our website though, so if you'd like to look at how to install everything from the front panel cables to the motherboard, GPU, CPU, SATA, even Molex, go and check that out in the cards now for a little bit more detail on how all of that works. I'm going to pop this in though, get all the cables wired up, and we hopefully at the end should have a complete system that's ready to be booted up. I'm going to pop the side panels back on and boot this thing up to check out the performance in a wide variety of titles, but first, how good it looks in the only way we know how. Roll that montage. Performance, I was really intrigued to see just how well this build would perform. So to find out, I tested it in a wide variety of titles, ranging from the likes of AAA games such as Hogwarts Legacy at 4K, to easier to run FPS titles like Fortnite and Apex Legends. In Hogwarts Legacy at 4K, the build achieved a strong 110 FPS on average when testing at 4K high settings, delivering an awesome gaming experience at this top resolution. Hogwarts Legacy is a title where FPS is naturally a bit less important, but still obviously of importance, and the visuals really do take over as a real driving force behind your gaming experience. Star Wars Jedi Survivor is a similar story, perhaps frame rate being slightly more important here, and at 4K epic settings, the build pulled in 85 FPS on average. This of course breaks the 60 FPS mark that most people will need to saturate a high-end 4K monitor, but admittedly doesn't give you particularly competitive frame rates at this top-end resolution. Tune the resolution down and of course should unlock a bit more FPS. In Call of Duty's Warzone 2 at 4K high once again, the build achieved a really astonishing 135 FPS. Here the 4090 shows its prowess as that top-end GPU with so much power you just basically don't know what to do with it. 90 and 99th percentile results were pretty good too, nice and consistent with not many frame drops showing in Warzone 2. Fortnite was next, and as always, just for the giggles really, we test this at 1080p competitive. The build pulled in 333 frames per second on average. That's a lot of tongue-twisting vowels and tongue-twisting consonants. Anyway, it did really well, performed very good. 90 and 99th percentile, super consistent. And if for some reason you were worried about how this build performs in Fortnite, worry no more. Apex Legends at 4K high also did well. 4K high was amazing in Apex, 260 FPS. Wow, wow, wow. And showed that this build can still play even those FPS titles tuned up to high resolutions and achieve awesome frame rates. In Call of Duty's Modern Warfare 2 at 4K to wrap things up, the build pulled in 171 FPS as well. Such a wide variety of titles here and consistently strong performance throughout. Frame rates admittedly a little bit low in the likes of Hogwarts Legacy and Star Wars Jedi Survivor, but still very, very strong indeed overall. If you want to buy any of the parts mentioned today, they will be linked at the affiliate links down below. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.